In this video, I'm exposing the side of Popeyes that rarely makes it into the commercials, but plays a serious role in how your body feels long after the meal is over. But it all starts with the numbers Popeyes doesn't want you to pay attention to: the calories, the fat, and especially the salt. Take their famous chicken sandwich. 690 calories and nearly 500 milligrams of sodium. That's not just a sandwich, it's basically your blood pressure's worst nightmare served on a brioche bun. A 5-piece fried chicken meal? Over 30 milligrams of sodium in one go. That's more than the American Heart Association says you should have in an entire day. Even the biscuits, which feel innocent, carry almost 700 milligrams of salt a pop. You stack that with fries and a soda, and you've quietly walked yourself into numbers that set you up for hypertension, clogged arteries, and all the downstream risks. And it's not just about salt. The fat content is staggering. The chicken sandwich alone brings 42 grams of fat, 15 of those saturated. That's the artery-clogging kind your doctor begs you to cut back on. Add a tender combo, and you're staring at over 30 grams more. For a kid or a senior with smaller caloric needs, that's practically their whole day's allowance before they even get to dinner. Now, here's where it gets trickier. Popeyes wraps all of this in a home-style Louisiana image, but peel it back and you see a different story. Their biscuits? Made with bleached, enriched flour and chemical leaveners. Preservatives like sodium aluminum phosphate and calcium disodium EDTA are tucked in there, along with artificial colors just to make them look golden. I always laugh when I see freshly baked signs, because nothing about that list feels like Grandma's kitchen. The marinades and Cajun spreads are just as loaded. We're talking MSG, artificial flavorings, and partially hydrogenated oils. Yes, the same trans fats we've been told to avoid for decades. Popeyes even admitted they still use MSG in their food, promising to phase it out by 2025. That's a polite way of saying, yeah, you're still eating it for now. And here's the rub. Popeyes knows flavor sells. They lean hard into the sugar-salt-fat trifecta because it keeps people hooked. But for anyone watching their health, whether it's blood pressure, cholesterol, or just waistline, one meal can blow your whole day's limits. It's like handing your future self a problem disguised as lunch. I remember the first time I checked nutrition numbers at a fast food place, I felt like I'd been lied to. That's exactly what's happening here. Popeyes won't tell you that your combo deal is basically a health hazard in a paper box. They'd rather you think crispy, juicy, indulgent, and never do the math. The truth is, for older adults, many already managing heart issues or diabetes, these meals are landmines. A Jamocha shake at Arby's may hide sugar, but Popeyes is hiding salt in plain sight. And unlike sugar, you can't always taste just how much sodium you're eating. Your body just pays the bill later. And that's the point Popeyes doesn't want you thinking about. Every crunchy bite feels good in the moment, but it chips away at your health in ways you don't notice until the damage piles up. Because behind the spice and the crunch, what Popeyes really serves is excess. Excess salt, excess fat, excess chemicals. And for too many people, that excess turns into doctor's visits they never saw coming. And once you see the numbers for what they really are, it's hard to look at that orange box the same way again. Because the risks don't stop at calories or sodium, Popeyes has also had its share of food safety scares. State health departments have traced multiple hepatitis A exposures back to Popeyes workers who showed up sick and handled food anyway. In South Carolina, hundreds of diners had to be notified and rushed in for vaccinations after a Popeyes employee infected with hepatitis A worked behind the counter. A few years later in Kentucky, the same thing happened again. One sick worker, and suddenly every customer over weeks of service had potentially been exposed to a contagious virus. These aren't minor slip-ups. They show how fragile the system really is. A single lapse in employee health policies, one person not staying home when they should, can put an entire community at risk. And it's not something Popeyes ever mentions in their ads about love that chicken. Then there are the supply chain problems. In 2019, the FDA had to recall more than 17 tons of gravy meant for Popeyes restaurants because it contained plastic fragments. Imagine ordering a box of tenders, pouring on that gravy, and not knowing sharp plastic was mixed inside. Luckily, no one was reported injured, but it revealed just how little oversight sometimes exists between the factory and your plate. And that's only the incidents we know about. In Canada, Popeyes was dragged into court over allegations of chicken sourced from an unauthorized, unsanitary supplier. Customers have also reported spoiled meat, bloody pieces of chicken, or food that simply tasted off. They're not the kind of stories that make national news, but they linger in local headlines and in customers' stomachs. Federal food safety experts warn that fast food supply chains are like a conveyor belt moving at high speed. One contaminated batch can ripple out to thousands of meals before anyone catches it. And with Popeyes expanding rapidly, stretching quality control thinner and thinner, the risk only grows. I'll never forget the first time I saw a local news segment about rotting food found at a fast food spot. It stuck with me more than any glossy ad ever could. And that's the reality here. The image Popeye sells is golden, crispy, and carefree. But the record shows cracks, employee illnesses, contaminated suppliers, safety recalls that remind us how quickly a safe meal can turn into a public health problem. And once you realize how thin the margin of safety really is, that chicken box doesn't feel quite so comforting anymore. And if you peek behind the counter, things only get worse. Popeyes has been repeatedly called out for how it treats the very workers holding the place together. In California, a class action lawsuit claims employees were forced to work through their lunch and rest breaks without pay. Think about that. People frying your chicken and bagging your biscuits weren't even allowed to stop and eat themselves. Some of the workers weren't even old enough to drive legally. Investigators in Oakland found kids as young as 13 behind the register, pushed into hours that broke nearly every child labor rule on the books. One teen bluntly said, "Our employer has violated almost every law put in place to protect young workers like us." That's not the kind of quote you want attached to your family-friendly chicken shop. Federal regulators confirmed it wasn't just a local slip. In 2024, the U.S. Department of Labor caught a Bay Area Popeyes franchisee with underage teens on the schedule and no overtime pay in sight. On the other coast, New Jersey owners running nearly 20 Popeyes stores in Massachusetts were fined over $200,000 for similar child labor and wage violations. When you see patterns stretching coast to coast, it's not just a few bad apples. And conditions inside some of these restaurants would make you think twice about ever stepping foot in one again. In Milwaukee, employees found mouse droppings in the walk-in freezers and still had to clock in. During a brutal cold snap, pipes burst, the heat went out, and workers were told to tough it out anyway. The ones who refused those unsafe shifts say they were punished for it. Imagine being fired for not wanting to work in a freezer full of vermin. It doesn't stop there. Wage theft, skipped overtime, and harassment claims have piled up from Florida to Canada. Popeyes' franchise model, where local owners cut costs however they can, has created a system where workers are treated as expendable, and corporate looks the other way until regulators come knocking. Parents and grandparents should shudder at this part of the story, because it's not just about the chicken on your plate, it's about the kids working behind the counter. Your grandkid could end up with a job at Popeyes, thinking it's a safe entry-level gig, only to find themselves scheduled illegally late on a school night or pressured into unsafe conditions. Popeyes likes to project an image of community and southern hospitality, but the lawsuits and fines tell a different story. Over and over, they've been caught bending or breaking the very laws designed to protect young workers and keep families safe. And once you see that picture clearly, you realize the abuse isn't just in the food. It's baked into the business model itself. And the way Popeyes markets itself proves it. Take their chicken tenders sold as if you're getting that prized tenderloin cut, the delicate strip of meat folks pay extra for at the butcher. But a 2022 lawsuit argues most of those tenders are just regular chicken breast cut into strips. Customers were paying premium prices for what amounts to the same old bird, dressed up with a fancier name. That trick of wording is everywhere on their menu. Hand battered, Louisiana style, 12-hour marinade. It paints a picture of grandma at the stove, flour on her apron, turning out crispy chicken with love. Yet corporate filings quietly admit the batter relies on artificial flavors, preservatives, and even artificial colors to make it look and taste authentic. The so-called marinade? It leans heavily on sodium phosphates and sugar syrups to do the heavy lifting, not fresh herbs. I remember when marinade meant garlic and vinegar sitting in a bowl overnight. At Popeyes, it often means lab-built flavor packets that guarantee the same salty punch from Miami to Milwaukee. They brag about not cutting corners, but the reality is, preservatives and additives are the real secret spices. Even their healthier-sounding options come with a catch. The blackened tenders pitched as simply seasoned, grilled, and lighter still cram 550 milligrams of sodium into a single small portion. That's nearly a quarter of your daily limit in just a few bites. It's a little like buying low-fat ice cream that quietly packs in more sugar to make up the taste. And then there's the hype machine. You probably remember the chicken sandwich craze, lines out the door, sold-out signs, viral videos. But one Tennessee customer was so fed up with Popeyes hyping a sandwich they couldn't deliver, he sued them for false advertising. It sounds almost silly, but it makes you wonder how many of their special deals are just smoke and mirrors to get you in the door, even if the product's not there. Their promises about MSG are another shell game. Popeyes admitted they'd used MSG for years to pump up flavor, but then quietly said they'd phase it out by 2025. Meanwhile, some stores were already calling their chicken all natural. So which is it? You can't slap natural on the box if the recipe still leans on monosodium glutamate to hook your taste buds. Consumer advocates have started pointing out these gaps, calling Popeyes' famous real Louisiana flavor little more than a salty, chemical-assisted illusion. And they're not wrong, most of that real spice taste comes from high fructose sugar, salt, and MSG. Real bay leaf or cayenne pepper has very little to do with it. For a company that loves to sell nostalgia, Southern tradition, home-style cooking, family togetherness, this kind of mislabeling is more than just a fine print issue. It's a trust issue. People think they're getting the good stuff when they're not. And Popeyes is banking on the fact that most customers won't read ingredient lists or lawsuits. Once you see the cracks in that marketing veneer, it changes the whole picture. Suddenly the slogans and commercials feel less like charm and more like a bait and switch. And it leaves you wondering what else they aren't telling you. Because once you pull back the curtain, you see that Popeyes' business model leans hard on something most customers never think about: the animals and the environment left in its wake. That crispy sandwich in your hand? It's built on a system where chickens are bred to grow unnaturally fast, so big, so quickly, that many collapse under their own weight before they ever reach the fryer. World Animal Protection says today's birds are pushed to grow 4.5 times larger than they should in less than 7 weeks. Imagine a child hitting full-grown adult size before finishing middle school. That's what's happening to these animals. The cost of that speed isn't just pounds of meat. It's pain, broken bones, chronic suffering, and suffocation in warehouses packed with birds. And here's the kicker. A single Popeyes sandwich traces back to nearly a quarter of a chicken's life. Which means every 2 for $5 deal represents real animals enduring misery you'll never see on the commercials. It doesn't stop at the farms. The waste from those industrial barns has to go somewhere, and often it ends up in the water. In Mississippi, poultry waste has spilled into the Pearl River, lacing it with nitrogen and arsenic from feed additives. The result? Algal blooms that kill fish, poison drinking water, and leave locals with taps they can't trust. Scientists even found antibiotics from poultry feed seeping into streams' penicillin traces, floating right alongside the base. That's not just an environmental mess, it's a public health warning. Drug-resistant bacteria don't care if you live near a chicken house or not. They spread. And yet, Popeyes likes to parade commitments it barely meets. They promise to eliminate medically important antibiotics by 2021. On paper, sure, but by 2024, watchdog audits still gave them a middling C. That's like bragging about passing with a 70 while everyone else is moving toward the honor roll. Same story with palm oil, the silent ingredient in fryers worldwide. Palm oil is notorious for fueling deforestation, and while some chains have scrambled to source better, Popeyes lagged. Their parent company only recently promised certified sustainable oil, and even then, watchdogs are skeptical. If you've followed these industries long enough, you know certified can be more about paperwork than forests. The sad irony is Popeyes leans on imagery of the South heritage, hospitality, tradition, while fueling some of the least traditional farming you could imagine. These birds don't peck at yards or roam fields. They're commodities, cranked out like widgets in a factory. And the land, the rivers, even the climate pays for it. For older customers especially, who grew up with different expectations of food and farming, it can feel like a bait and switch. You thought you were buying a piece of fried chicken, not funding a system that dumps waste into rivers and pushes animals through growth cycles so punishing they can't stand up. It's a hard truth, but it's part of the orange box bargain, and the company isn't racing to change. Promises of cage-free eggs by 2025, slow reductions in antibiotics, a few marketing lines about quality, all of it feels like dragging their feet until someone forces their hand. Meanwhile, the sandwiches keep flying out the door. So when you bite into that Popeyes combo, you're not just tasting spice and crunch, you're tasting a chain that built its empire on suffering animals and strained ecosystems. It's the fine print no menu board will ever show you. And once you know it, that biscuit doesn't feel quite as warm. Because the further you look up the chain, the colder it gets. At the corporate level, Popeyes is controlled by Restaurant Brands International, an empire run with the ruthless efficiency of 3G capital. And when you dig into their playbook, it's clear what sits at the top of the priority list: profits. Workers and customers are way down the page. Take the numbers. In 2018, RBI pulled in over $5 billion in revenue. That's billion with a B. Yet the people sweating over hot fryers at Popeyes were pulling in around $8 an hour. You don't need a finance degree to see the imbalance. While Wall Street celebrated, folks in aprons were debating whether to skip lunch just to afford gas to get to the next shift. And when workers did push back, the corporate response spoke volumes. In Canada, when Tim Hortons employees, also owned by RBI, won a bump in minimum wage, the company didn't congratulate them. Instead, they cut health benefits and slashed paid breaks. In other words, sure, we'll give you a raise, then we'll take it right back out of your pocket. That's not community-minded leadership. That's a cold, calculated strategy to keep margins fat while employees are left running on fumes. Even when it's not about wages, the pattern holds. Look at 2015, when a chief financial officer of a big Popeyes franchise group was indicted for embezzling close to $1 million. Federal prosecutors said he funneled restaurant money into luxuries like a sports car. While frontline workers hustled to sell more chicken, the exec was busy skimming off the top. That case wasn't some rumor mill, it was a Justice Department prosecution. And if you think that was a one-off, the culture speaks louder. During the pandemic, when restaurants were shuttered and workers terrified, franchise owners begged RBI for relief on fees. The parent company's first instinct? Keep charging full freight, even as sales collapsed. Only after pressure did they offer temporary deferrals. It tells you where loyalty lies, not with the cooks or the cashiers, but with the shareholders watching quarterly reports. Even investors have raised eyebrows. Some lawsuits accuse RBI of hyping growth while hiding how expensive and messy expansion really was. In other words, even the people with money in the game feel like they've been misled. And if the folks buying stock feel shortchanged, imagine how the customers and workers who never see the balance sheet are treated. This is where Popeyes' feel-good marketing really rubs raw. You'll see them drape themselves in the language of heritage and community. They'll post tributes for Black History Month or rainbow banners in June. But when workers fight for the most basic rights, fair pay, safe conditions, time to eat lunch, the corporate machine finds a way to squeeze harder. It's social justice in the press release, cost-cutting in the payroll office. For everyday families, that matters more than the slogans. When I see a chain brag about celebrating community, while the cook behind the counter can't afford health insurance, it makes me wonder who exactly is being celebrated. Because if you've lived long enough, you know this old truth. A company's ethics aren't written on a billboard. They're written in how they treat the lowest paid worker in the room. So when you bite into that crispy chicken sandwich, remember what looks like a cheap lunch might be coming at the expense of someone else's paycheck, someone else's benefits, or someone else's dignity. And the folks at the top? They're too busy cashing in to mention it. That's the real taste Popeyes leaves behind. The flavor of a business where the grease drips down but the dollars never do. And while the money trickles upward, the marketing spin flows in the opposite direction straight down to you and me. Popeyes has mastered the art of polishing its image, dressing up fried chicken in the language of culture, inclusion, and authenticity. Remember the chicken sandwich frenzy of 2019? The lines wrapped around corners. The commercials wrapped themselves in pride flags and Black History Month tributes. It wasn't just food, it was framed as part of the cultural conversation. But here's the catch. Critics say that kind of branding is less about values and more about margins. As one commentator put it, companies use wokeness like they use anything else to turn a profit. Popeyes is a textbook case. The same chain that hands out rainbow logos and upbeat commercials has also kept wages low, fought worker protections, and leaned on suppliers with checkered records. The ads beam with pride, but behind the fryer, the reality tells a much different story. Even on the subject of food quality, Popeyes' message rarely matches the fine print. You've probably heard the line about their chicken soaking in a 12-hour bold Louisiana marinade. Sounds like Grandma's recipe, right? What they don't broadcast as loudly is that the bold seasonings include MSG, powdered buttermilk, artificial flavors, and chemical preservatives. Not exactly the porch swing authenticity the commercials would have you believe. And when Popeyes insists it never cuts corners, reality has a way of disagreeing. Federal inspectors once pulled back the curtain when a gravy shipment, yes, a Popeyes-branded pork and beef gravy mix was recalled because it contained shards of plastic. Hand-breaded charm doesn't quite fit with served alongside metal fragments. It's the kind of contradiction that makes you question what's really happening in those kitchens we never see. Even their so-called healthier items come with hidden strings attached. The blackened tenders, marketed as lightly seasoned, still pack over 500 milligrams of sodium in a small portion. That's about a quarter of what you're supposed to have in an entire day gone in just a couple of strips. It's like buying low-sugar cereal only to see sugar as the second ingredient. The label doesn't lie, but the spin sure does. And then there's the selective transparency. Popeyes promised it would cut MSG from its menu by 2025, but some locations already describe their chicken as all natural. Technically, they're not breaking the rules. Marketing departments rarely do, but it's the kind of half-truth that lets a corporation have it both ways. Customers walk away thinking they've chosen something clean and wholesome, when really it's the same formula with the same additives. What makes this so effective is the theater of it all. Commercials show smiling chefs in crisp aprons, marinating and hand-breading with care. Meanwhile, in the actual supply chain, sauces rely on high-fructose corn syrup, frozen bags of pre-mixed seasonings, and shortcuts designed for speed, not quality. It's less like Southern home-style cooking, and more like an industrial kitchen hiding behind a Cajun accent. Older customers see this contradiction more clearly than most. They remember when fried chicken meant a Sunday meal, cooked slow in a cast-iron skillet with real buttermilk and flour. Compare that memory to Popeyes' powdered buttermilk blend and MSG flavor enhancement, and it's hard not to feel cheated. Nostalgia is what Popeyes sells, but nostalgia in a box isn't the same as the real thing. The irony is, Popeyes doesn't even need to exaggerate. People love fried chicken, it sells itself. But instead of being straight with customers about what's in the food and how it's made, the chain leans into hype. And when you peel back the hype, you see the familiar fast food formula. The story looks handcrafted, but the product is built on preservatives, additives, and corporate sleight of hand. So the next time you see Popeyes touting its authentic Louisiana flavor, it's worth asking, flavor of what exactly? Because if you believe the ads, it's culture, heritage, and heart. But if you believe the ingredients list and the recalls, it's salt, MSG, and a side of spin. And that difference, that gap between the glossy promise and the gritty truth, is the real story Popeyes doesn't want you to taste. And that drip has finally started to stain Popeyes' image. In city after city, outrage has been bubbling up, sometimes from customers, sometimes from workers themselves. In Milwaukee, for example, Popeyes employees held a press event in 2023 to show videos of burst pipes and mouse droppings in their stores. Not only were health inspectors called in, but those workers said managers tried to punish them for speaking out. Imagine being told to serve chicken in a shop where the freezer smells like rodents, then being threatened if you refuse to keep quiet. That same year, regulators cracked down on Popeyes operators in Massachusetts. The state's attorney general found underage kids working illegal hours across 19 stores. The franchisee had to cough up more than $200,000 in fines and back pay. Think about that. Popeyes was literally caught breaking laws written to protect kids from exploitation. To parents and grandparents, that kind of revelation stings because it turns a place you once trusted for family dinners into the same place endangering someone else's child behind the counter. It isn't just local news stories either. National watchdogs have been watching Popeyes closely. Food safety coalitions gave the chain a middling grade on its antibiotics policy, calling it a step but nowhere near enough. Environmental groups keep warning that Popeyes' supply chain still fuels deforestation and pollution. These aren't anonymous internet complaints, they're public reports, backed by data, naming Popeyes as part of the problem. And in the digital age, bad news spreads faster than any ad campaign can bury it. Blogs, exposés, and YouTube channels dedicated to consumer awareness have latched onto Popeyes as an example of what's wrong with modern fast food. Videos with titles like "Don't eat at Popeyes again until you watch this" have pulled millions of views. That many eyeballs means even loyal customers are starting to ask tougher questions about what's in the food and how it gets there. You can feel the tide shifting. Nostalgic fans, many of them older, many of them longtime customers, aren't satisfied with a clever commercial or a crispy sandwich anymore. They want to know what's hiding behind the fryer. They want answers about the lawsuits, the recalls, the kids working past midnight for peanuts. And when they don't get those answers, skepticism hardens into distrust. That's why the protests matter. That's why the lawsuits matter. Each one chips away at the story Popeyes has spent decades selling. Because at some point, a brand isn't just fried chicken. It's every scandal, every violation, every corner cut, baked into the recipe whether corporate admits it or not. And when the voices get loud enough, when enough people see behind the curtain, there's no marketing spin left strong enough to drown them out.